Welcome back to MG Midget, birth of a race car. This is the journey from car restoration to the MG Car Club Speed Series. In this episode, we're going to have a look at fitting the front suspension. The first part of my front suspension rebuild is going to be getting the lower wishbones on. I've pre-assembled the stub axles. So first interesting challenge is getting the poly bushes into the frame. So my approach, just to share that with you, is to preload the poly bushes with the tubes, and then what I'm using here is a spreading plate to put that in at a slight angle, and that is actually allowing me to slide the wishbone up so that the hole can get into the hole where it's supposed to be positioned. So I'm going to do that first on one side, and then I've got a second plate to be able to do that on the other side. So after much foul language and a fair bit of time, I managed to get that side in, and then through a process of mini brain waves and deduction, actually worked out that if you put the two inner bushes just in, you can slide the shaft, the wishbone, into place fairly easily as the bushes just compress into the wishbone, and then through the hole on the outer side, on both outer sides, you simply slide the outer bush onto the shaft, put the washer on, and then use the nut to tighten that up into place. And once I'd realised that, the job itself only took a few minutes. The only thing you need to bear in mind is you need to use copious amounts of the lithium grease so that the bush slides nicely into place. So I'm going to fit the other side now. So I've got the wishbones on now and fitted the bolts with poly bushes. Hopefully that'll make the suspension handle better on the track. Now I've fitted the anti-roll bar as well. A couple of points to note. Decided to go for poly bushes. This is an 11/16 anti-roll bar, so it's uprated for the uprated suspension. And what I've done is I've taken longer bolts and taken those straight through the chassis to the other side, so hoping that'll give it more strength so that the anti-roll bar mounting won't just pull out, which I've actually had that happen to me, so I know that that's something of a weak spot. So that extra strength should hopefully keep the roll bar in trim. So on with the shock mount now, and then we can get the spring in. The front shock has been mounted now. This is an uprated front shock to match the 400-pound springs. First thing I've noticed is I've tightened up the kingpin nut here previously to 40 pounds, but it's not perfectly square with the hole on the shock, so as a result I can't get the bolt through, so I'm going to have to undo this nut in order to allow the movement and get this back in. So maybe a note for assembly of the stub axle: leave this until the suspension's assembled. Once that's in place, we can then start to have a think about how to get the spring in. With the shock in place and now the stub axle mounted up as well, I've got my new 2-3 degree trunnion on the top. Next job is to mount up the springs. So what I'm using here is 400-pound springs. That should be probably just okay for the road, but will certainly stiffen up the front end no end for sprinting and track type work. So the way I'm going to put these in is slide them in underneath, then the lower spring mount, and then what I'm going to do is use some all thread, some 8mm all thread, and I'm going to slide that through the base through here, and then slowly tighten that up to bring up the lower spring mount and put the tension on the spring. I've done it other ways in the past. I've released this nut and dropped it out, but that was with standard springs. I mean, there's a lot more strength in these springs, so I'm going to do it the proper way and make sure the spring is in control and is not going to risk snapping out. So I'll mount that up, and then I'll show you what that looks like. Well, the good news is that because the springs are shorter than standard springs, as I've put them in, there's actually been very little to adjust them up. So as a result, I've been able to get the spring hanger in, and only with a small piece of all thread, probably about 3 to 4 inches worth, to pull the back end in place. That's all I've needed to get the springs to go in. So I've got to just remove this one piece, put another replacement bolt in, torque it all up, and then I can do a final spanner check on all the bolts around the front suspension. Okay, so that's the front suspension all assembled. Spring, uprated anti-roll bar, 3-degree camber trunnion, uprated dampers. I've pre-assembled a new disc onto the hub. So next step is going to be to fit the hub onto the stub axle, and then decided, having reviewed the calipers, I've purchased a set of new calipers. The calipers are standard, they're not uprated or anything special, but I'm using Mintex 1144 pads. Read good reviews about those, so I'm going to give those a try. So put a set of Mintex pads in, I'm going to bolt up the caliper, torque up the nut on the front, reattach the braided brake hoses, and then that will be this corner all complete. So there we have the finished front suspension. So we've got new brakes, discs, and uprated springs, dampers, reverse camber, and uprated roll bar. So all I've got to do now is build this on the other side, and then the car will actually be ready to drop down onto its wheels, which will be a great milestone to reach.